Hello, welcome. I recently did a couple of videos that were really heavily scripted and pretty long run times, and they took a very, very long time to edit, and they're also a bit more serious in subject matter. So to take a break from that for a little bit, today I just wanted to talk about an animated movie that I really enjoyed and recently saw for the first time. It's called Storks, and I'm going to talk about it. Housekeeping. If you want to do all the YouTube stuff to help me out, I appreciate it a bunch. Subscribing, liking, commenting, whatever it is. I also set up an email where you can just kind of say stuff to me. Preferably, we can just kind of chat if you feel like it. I'll check it every once in a while to see if anybody said anything. Other than that, yeah, I'm going to talk about Storks. Let's go. I barely have a script, I just have some notes. I'm just going to talk about this movie. I will quickly say that I first saw the movie about a couple months ago when we were still very much in like quarantine times, at least out here in LA, and at first I really didn't think too much of it. I just kind of felt like okay about it, but I found myself coming back to it multiple times, especially over the last month or so. I think I've watched Storks about 8 times. This movie continues to grow on me, and I don't think it's because it's an objectively good movie. It's definitely not a bad movie, and I'll get to that, but I don't think it's some kind of masterpiece. I don't think it's trying to deliver some really deep message about anything. I don't think the characters are especially well written, but despite all that, the end product, how it all comes together, is kind of special and just a lot of fun. And here's my guess as to why I've ended up really liking this movie. Well, for one thing, it makes me feel like a kid, which is kind of a common phrase among like adult fans of stuff, especially animation, which is really a way of saying that it was escapist, that you could forget about all your troubles for a little bit and get it involved in the movie. And that's true for Storks in a more specific sense. I think it has a lot to do with how Storks reminds me of just a lot of the kind of off-brand movies, animated movies that I happened to grow up with. I'm thinking of non-Disney animated movies that I saw growing up. Most of them are CG and sort of later on in my childhood too. So think of stuff like Shark Tale, Over the Hedge, Shrek, specifically Shrek 2 and 3, Nickelodeon movies like the Rugrats movies and the Wild Thornberrys crossover 1, and Ice Age, definitely. These are not movies that stand up against the test of time especially well. Some of them, Shrek 2 in particular, that's a really solid movie. They don't tend to have the timeless quality. It's offering something a little more, I don't want to say cheap, but certainly in terms of like storytelling and character and overall long-standing value, it feels like generic brand. Specifically, I think these kinds of movies, I rounded out a few sort of key traits of these types of animated movies that I remember from being a kid. And for one thing, they're really colorful, really vibrant colors, oversaturated stuff. They have pretty thin characters. Each character maybe has a singular motivation, really basic character traits, and they never really, even with backstory, they don't feel fleshed out. They also tend to have just a handful of ultra memorable scenes. Shrek 2, you can think of storming the castle. That's a huge musical moment as well. Ice Age, you can think of some of the big action set pieces or the dodo scene, all that kind of stuff. And lastly, a lot of these movies tend to have what I would call bad music supervision. In other words, the music that's not the score music tends to be immediately dated pop music. Those are just some of the defining factors. I will be talking about how Storks kind of fits into those, right? How it kind of checks those boxes for me. So first of all, on the visuals, it's really vibrant. It's very easy to look at this movie, even if the art direction isn't especially interesting. I do think a big asset it has on the visual side is how there is an emphasis on visual comedy. The characters, for sure, in Storks are not that, they're certainly not deep. It absolutely has some fantastic and memorable scenes and set pieces. The introduction of Tulip when she's trying to get all the flightless animals to fly for the first time. The big scene with the wolves and the subsequent chase scene, which is one of my least favorite parts of the movie, is still very memorable. And definitely the silent fight with the penguins towards the end of the movie is fantastic. It's so good. It's such a fun premise. And of course, Storks also has some really bad pop music It feels like anything else would have worked better there. So with all that said, that's part of the argument. The Storks does remind me of those movies that I happen to grow up with, but at the same time, it's more than that. I think I can honestly say that I enjoy Storks a lot more than most of those old movies that I mentioned earlier. And I wanted to try to figure out why that is. I think one big aspect is that the movie does really feel like there's definitely a feeling of self-awareness in terms of the script and how information is presented to the audience. Because yes, the story is very formulaic. However, I get some kind of kick out of when characters, they summarize their character, or they summarize their motivations, or they just blurt out the current stakes and what they need to do next.
The only thing you need to do to be named boss on Monday is liberate the orphan tulip.
I don't fit in anywhere, and all I want to do is help. We never stop. We never stop. We never stop.
I love you, brother. It's like we're best friends that live together.
One person sees a stork with a baby, my chances of being named boss are ruined. StorkCon is on Monday, today is Friday. If I can just deliver this thing by then, I can still be named boss. Okay, it's Saturday night. As long as we deliver by tomorrow, we can still make it for StorkCon Monday. This one single package could ruin everything I've worked towards my entire life.
If this baby finds her family, I mean, it's worth it.
It doesn't feel like it gets in the way of, it's not like it stops in its tracks to break the fourth wall and turn to camera and really acknowledge the audience. It moves along really well. And that's another thing that separates it from some of those other movies I mentioned, is that the pacing feels modern. Certain aspects of the script and the characters and all that structural stuff does feel dated to me, kind of in a good way sometimes, but the pacing feels completely modern to me. It moves along very quickly, but it also doesn't go way overboard with the fast pacing to the point where it feels like Rise of Skywalker, which for me is like the epitome of pacing that's way too fast for the experience to be fun or enjoyable for anybody. The last huge positive trait that the movie has is that the voice acting feels so good to me. I'm not going to say that everybody in the cast across the board was knocking it out of the park. I do think everybody in the main cast does a good job, and Kelsey Grammer is very funny in his role. Andy Samberg, I mean, obviously he's a very funny guy. He's done some great work. He is kind of the straight man overall. Especially early on, he's pretty unlikable. He's really not a character that you feel connected with outside of, well, we all want to be successful to a certain degree. I haven't watched a lot of other video essays or reviews about Storks, so this is just me, but I'm assuming that a lot of other people would agree with this and have probably commented on it already. But Katie Crown, the voice actor who plays Tulip, is so good in this role. In this movie, it really feels like her delivery works so well. At least it gives the impression that there was a lot of thought put into different readings of lines. Something about it's just so good and so funny, from timing and just creative ways of saying lines. If I look at a bunch of lines from the movie, specifically Tulip's lines, just written out, they're not that good. They're not that funny, usually. It's pretty basic stuff, even if it's just in a scene and a character's going from here to there and saying something very basic about what's going on. Katie Crown, she nails it.
Oh, Tulip is just fine. Orphan hurts my heart. I will rock this!
You will rock this!
Oh, yeah!
Gonna rock it hard!
Rock it
and
hard!
What's the...
I always thought it was something more like strength, determination!
Nope, that's way off.
Oh, you hear about Stephen Gloria? I've never done this before, but I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
Looks like an airplane.
Well, kind of is an airplane, I guess. Oh man, you laugh when you're uncomfortable. I'm the most popular person in the entire letter sorting department. I said that I am the... You are a baby. You are a baby. Little hands, little feet. Look at you.
Stop.
We gotta go.
I'm still asleep.
I know, we gotta go. What are the chances of that? I guess pretty high in a glass factory.
And in fact, the only big negative thing that I did want to mention really quickly is that the human characters, whenever they're just humans on screen, I'm kind of bored immediately. I hate the storyline with the family and the human characters. I don't think it's fun or interesting. I understand why they wanted to put that in a movie about storks and storks getting back to delivering babies. I'm not trying to make a case for this movie being phenomenal or super impressive or anything like that. It doesn't feel like something that would remind you of the first really great meal you had, like the first time you had this killer meal at this fancy restaurant and it really changed your impressions of the culinary arts. It's more like, oh, you were at the store and you were like, okay, maybe I'll get this cereal that I used to eat as a kid. I haven't had it for like 10, 15 years, and then you get back home and you try it out and you're like, yeah, this is really unhealthy, but it's also pretty good. Like there's just a satisfaction there, which is compounded by nostalgia. That's kind of what Storks feels like to me. It does feel old in a lot of ways, and it triggers nostalgia, which is a cheap way to enjoy a movie, but sometimes it works. On another level, it does feel contemporary. It does feel fresh, and the performances, just there are enough good things here in the mix to keep me coming back to it as kind of a comfort food. I think these kinds of movies should be appreciated too, not just this is a masterpiece, this is the best thing ever. Of course, there's a lot of talk about those kinds of movies on the internet, but I also think there's plenty of room for talking about movies that, yeah, they're kind of mediocre. The gestalt, what they become, even if just in your memory, is delightful. Maybe it's a personal thing, but I feel like I need that right now. I just feel like it's nice. And that's it. I just wanted to talk about it. So thanks for letting me ramble. I would be curious to hear whether there's a community around this movie, whether it is pretty popular or is sort of gaining popularity in the few years since it's been released. But other than that, I guess I just want to say thanks for indulging me for a little bit. I'm going to stop talking now and have some more coffee. Until the next one, thanks for stopping by.